Hi, it's Penny here, and I thought in honor of Valentine's Day that I would share with you some of my most favorite romance books. Now, I am not generally a fan of romance, so I think pretty much all of these are also fantasy, which is what I mostly read, but I wouldn't say I normally read romantasy. I want books to be leaning more on the fantasy side, but every now and then a romance will win me over. So I'm going to talk about some of these. I actually have 5 honorable mentions, most of which are honorable mentions because I either don't really remember them properly or because I don't think what I really liked about them was the romance, even if I did like the romance. And then I have another 5 where I did really like the romance. Although I have cheated because the number 1 spot is an author who has written multiple fantasy romance type series that I really love, and they just have a knack for writing romance that I can enjoy. If you watch my videos, you can probably guess who that's going to be. But anyway, let's start with the honorable mentions. So firstly, we have Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko. So this follows this young girl, and she has been sent to basically become one of the companions of this prince, or is he an emperor? This is one where I haven't put it on here because I don't really remember it, but also it wasn't necessarily the romance that I loved, although I did like it. So this young girl gets sent to be this prince's companion, and then there's a bunch of them that are companions and they kind of develop magical abilities. However, this young girl has been sent with the idea that she will then assassinate him. So at the same time as building this bond and this really strong friendship with him and these other companions, she knows what she's being set up for. Or did she not know? And then it's like even worse when she finds out. I can't really remember. It's been a little while since I've read this. However, I think this book and the next book are maybe the only YA books on this list. So this would be one of the YA fantasy romances I would recommend. But low on the romance, you know more about the companionship and the betrayal. Then we have Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. Again, this one I do remember it, although I could do with a reread too because I do love it a lot. But I more love the fantasy world and the writing style as opposed to the romance, but the romance is a fairly decent element in this book. So this is following a guy named Laszlo, and he has this deep interest in the city of Weep. They call it Weep because it lost its name. No one remembers its name anymore, and no one remembers anything about it anymore, and they kind of think maybe it's not real. However, then something happens that kind of leads Laszlo and some other people to kind of go on an adventure or go on an exploration to try and find the city and maybe solve the problem that it's having. There's some really cool stuff in here to do with gods and all the different magical abilities that certain characters have, really unique and are really woven into the emotional journey of all the characters, and the writing style is beautiful. This is a book and the sequel as well that were very popular in their time. I don't see as many people talking about it now, but whenever I do see anyone talking about it, they're saying they love it. And I know a lot of people really like the romance as well. I didn't mind it, but for me, it was the magic of the world and the writing that really make me love this. I promise things will get more romancy as we go on. But next we have The Betrayals by Bridget Collins. So we're following this failed politician who's been sent back to his old school. Now at this school, they study the game. And throughout the book, it's never really clear what the game is. It's kind of like poetry and music and politics and religion and everything all mixed together, but it's also none of those things. I loved the way that it described this abstract concept of the game, but I also really loved the relationships that the story is built around. So he goes back to the school and is kind of dealing with the current situation there, but you're also getting his journal entries from when he was a young man at the school and learning about the game initially and being very competitive and obsessive about the game. And there's one particular other student that he has a relationship with that's maybe a little bit romantic, maybe a little bit toxic. There's definitely a lot of betrayals, as the title would imply. And I actually think it's the betrayals I love the most. I love the game, but I also loved how often characters would do things and you would see them justifying their actions, and you as the reader would know how terribly it's going to go, like how terribly the other person is going to take what they're doing, and just seeing it coming. I loved it. But this is also another one that I think I'm due a reread of. Like, just count that for all the honorable mentions in this video. As well, we have The Daughter of the Forest by Juliette Marillier. So this one, I know I love the romance. It's a very slow fantasy story, maybe similar in style to like Robin Hobb's kind of books. We are following this young girl who has a large family that she loves. However, then this kind of dark sorceress gets involved and turns her brothers into swans, and she isn't allowed to speak and has to weave these painful nettles into these shrouds, something I've forgotten. She has to weave those, and she can't speak until she's finished, and if she can do that, she can get her brothers turned back into humans. But while she's in the middle of doing that, she gets kidnapped and taken off by this other guy, and there's a lot of like misunderstandings between them, you know, made a lot worse by the fact that she can't talk. However, even though he has kidnapped her, there's a lot of misunderstanding, and he is actually a very kind man, and like the experience of them learning about each other, but all the while she can't say anything, and she's like constantly weaving these nettles and like in terrible pain and like missing her brothers and being desperate to get back to them. Such an emotional story, but I did also quite like the romance, like in between massive bouts of crying. This book, so emotional. Loved it. Then lastly, we have the Sixth World series by Rebecca Roanhorse. So I think we only got 2 books in this series, and it's now kind of on hiatus. We don't know if we will ever get more books in the series, even though I'm pretty sure there was a massive cliffhanger. So that's very frustrating. This follows a woman named Mags, and she is a Native American, and I think they have like different like magical powers depending on their ancestry, and she in particular has very strong powers. And also it's like a post-apocalyptic world where I think it's mainly just the people in the reservations that have survived, but I'm not really sure what's going on outside. I think it's like even worse apocalypse. But then as well, the gods are getting very involved in events. I really want to reread these, but I also really want to do that knowing that there's more coming in the series. But I know that I did really like the romance. I don't really remember everything about it, but I think it is the general pattern that I do like, where she meets this other guy. He's kind of annoying. She doesn't like him first off, even though like he doesn't do anything terrible. He just kind of rubs her the wrong way. But then they have to work together, and through that they like learn to respect each other, although I do think there are some betrayals there as well. Again, I've forgotten a lot, but I did really enjoy this one. So now let's get into my actual top 5. Firstly, we have House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas, and I say this so sadly because I loved this first book in the series. I'm only talking about the first book in the series. I want to pretend the rest of the series doesn't exist because I did not like the other 2 books, but this first book, so good. We are following this party girl, Bryce. She is involved in this murder, and as a result they think that she's going to be a very key person in terms of like investigating the murder and figuring out what really happened. So they assign her this like guardian angel. So this is in this like kind of urban fantasy world. It's like kind of like a modern society with phones and technology, but also, you know, Bryce is half elf, and there's angels and shapeshifters, werewolves, fairies, vampires, all those supernatural type creatures. So the world is really interesting, and the plot had so many twists and turns, so many like very emotional moments. Bryce herself is an amazing character because everybody underestimates her. They just write her off as this party girl, but she actually has like so much substance. Now, where did all that substance go in the later books? I don't know, but this first book was amazing. And it's fairly obvious in the book, but she has a romance with this guardian angel guy, and I was into the romance, you know? I shipped it. I enjoyed the romantic scenes. Like, he's gone through a lot of trauma, and by spending time with her, he learns to find joy in the world again, and she has been often in situations where she doesn't feel safe, and she learns to feel safe with him. So it's a great romance. It's a great book. Shame about the rest of the series. Okay, then we have This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Murta and Max Gladstone. So this is a very like poetical, vibey book. There's not really a plot, even though I'll give you a plot synopsis, but just know the plot is still very abstract and unclear throughout this. So we are following Red and Blue, and they are like time travelers or agents for these different factions. One is this very organic future where everything is plants and nature, and the other one is from this very like technological future. And these two futures are at war, basically going back and changing the past to try and make it more likely that one or the other will exist. And while they're doing that, they start like writing letters to each other, taunting each other, and each chapter kind of goes back and forth explaining how they got the letter, which often involves them like kind of solving some kind of problem or like performing some crazy activity. And then you also get the letter, and they like slowly become more and more like love letters. And it's such a beautiful book. And some of the lines are just so romantic and beautiful. And maybe it's not your classic romance type story, but parts of this are so romantic and beautiful. I think it captures the feeling of romance, even if the plot isn't always romantic. Okay, now we're up to the top 3. So firstly, we have One for My Enemy by Olivia Blake. I really love Olivia Blake's writing style, even if I don't always love her execution. And even with One for My Enemy. So this is kind of like a Romeo and Juliet retelling, except that the two families are these like magical families or magical mafia type families that are at war with each other. And within that, we have a romance between the two youngest siblings, where they met each other, and the guy is supposed to be trying to get information from her or like sabotaging her, but once they meet each other, they just get along. They've got wonderful banter. It's that thing where two people meet and they just get along straight away, which you might say isn't realistic, but you know you've met those people who just like straight away you feel like you get them, and they're like able to build on each other's jokes straight away, and just the way that they speak to each other and the way they communicate with each other is so loving, like right from the start. Even though you also know right from the start that they're kind of fated to be at odds with each other, and they've got like this whole family drama. So the plot of this is very convoluted. There is also other relationships between other people in the family that are explored, and there's some weird, dark, magical stuff going on. And I didn't mind all of that. I thought it got a bit unfocused and unclear what was going on. I really could have just read a whole book of I've actually forgotten their names. Sasha and Lev. I love them forever. Then we have another book that I have just raved about all last year since I read it at the beginning of last year, and that is The Cursed Princess Club by Lamcat. So originally this was published as a webtoon, which is how I read it. However, it is now being published as books. I actually thought, based on the cover of the 5th book, that we might be getting close to the end, but I had to check. I think it's maybe like 2/3 of the way through. There's still a lot to go in terms of the book releases. Anyway, this follows the 3 pastel princesses who have been betrothed to the 3 plaid princes. However, while the older 2 sisters are like beautiful princesses who sing and make flowers grow around them and birds come and do their hair, the 3rd princess has like green skin and green hair and pointy teeth, and when the youngest prince discovers that this is who he's betrothed to, he is not happy about it. Discovering this, the youngest princess runs out into the forest where she meets up with the Cursed Princess Club, which is a bunch of princesses who have different curses and haven't been able to cure them. And the story is like very humorous, but also really wholesome and has so many good messages. And like slowly we get one particular romance that I don't want to spoil, but I really love like that slow burn romance where they just get to know each other, they overcome their communication difficulties, they get a lot of support from their family around them, they learn stuff about themselves that helps them to be confident in the relationship. Like it's a beautiful romance. And there's also some romances in there that maybe don't play out in the way you expected or like weren't what you expected at all. It's got some lovely twists and turns. Like, it starts out as just this silly story about some princesses and some princes getting married, but it goes in such interesting directions, and the plot is so clever and the humor is so clever while also still being incredibly wholesome. Perfection. Okay, then my number one, which as I already alluded to, is an author, because I could not pick a single series by them and I didn't want to just fill the whole list up with their books. So we're talking about Ilona Andrews, who wrote multiple things that I like. Let's start out with the ones I liked the least and build our way up. Sure, why not? Most recently, I've been reading the Edge novels, which is set in a world where we have the Broken, which is our world and has no magic. We also have the Weird, which is where there's lots of magic. And then in between there is the Edge, which is kind of like the area you have to travel through to move between the two dimensions, and only certain people can go into the Edge. And we're following kind of a bunch of different characters, mainly from the Edge, where life is a bit difficult. And in each book, there's like a different main couple that we're following, as well as a more fantastical, magical plot. So I'm actually only really in this video counting the first book. Even though I liked the other ones, I haven't actually read the fourth book yet. It's just over there waiting for me to read it. Just out of reach though. The second and third books, even though I did like the romances, I wasn't as on board with them or as on board with the plot as I was the first book. So in the first book, we have this girl from the Edge who's trying to raise her younger brothers and really struggling. She meets this guy from the Weird, and through a misunderstanding they end up working together. And I really liked the way in this one particularly that Ilona Andrews wrote the like miscommunication, where you can see they still go into it with good intentions and they're still trying to communicate, but just still misunderstanding each other for very specific reasons, and still like always respecting each other and like slowly learning about each other and coming to depend on each other and trust each other and respect each other. Like, this is what Ilona Andrews does that I love. You know, I said I would order these in terms of how much I like them, and I keep changing the order in my head. So next I'm gonna go with the Innkeeper Chronicles. Now this is probably actually just the opposite order of what I've read these book series, so maybe it's not fair. But anyway, the Innkeeper Chronicles, we have basically a world where all the supernatural creatures of the world are actually aliens, and when they are passing through Earth, which is like a big transportation hub, they will stay at these inns. And we are following an innkeeper who is just trying to get her new inn up and running and having to deal with these like crazy alien guests. Like vampires and shapeshifters and all that kind of stuff. And while she's doing that, she's also trying to find out what happened to her missing parents. She does meet up with this particular shapeshifter, and once again, at first, they don't get along, but there's a particular threat in the neighborhood that they have to work together on, and you know, it plays out like it always does in Ilona Andrews' books. I think what I also like in their books is it's often very slow burn. I think it took at least till the fourth book before anything really serious happened. Well, depending on your definition of serious. Anyway, I particularly like this love interest because, well, Ilona Andrews does also often do kind of those alpha male trope type characters, and while I like that her female characters will like pull them down a peg and like call them out for that behavior, I'd say that Innkeeper Chronicles is probably the least alpha male of her characters, or of her male love interests, although he's still a very tough guy and like technically an actual shapeshifter alpha. Anyway, also by Ilona Andrews, we have the Hidden Legacy series. This is a series in a world where there are different magical houses or families that have a lot of political power. We're following this family that runs a private investigation firm, although they then end up getting involved with these very magical and powerful families. But they have quite rare powers. The older sister can tell if people are lying. The middle sister can make people fall in love with her. And the third one kind of like transform herself. We've only had so far a trilogy for the older sister and a trilogy for the middle sister. I think at some point we'll get a trilogy for the younger sister, but each one of these meets up with a guy, like they're working for the private investigation firm, trying to solve murders, and also there's always a guy involved that ends up working with them. These are probably the most romancy of the books. Is that true? but they still have like the book covers, especially the originals of the first trilogy. They look very smutty, romantic-y type books. They're not really as much like that as you might think. There's still a really strong magical plotline in these books. They're so good. Then we have my all-time fave, and that is the Kate Daniels series. So in this, we are following Kate, who is a mercenary, but she also has kind of an interesting family that we slowly learn about in the series. And this is in a world where magic has started to come back into the world, but it's come back in waves. So sometimes magic works and sometimes technology works, but like because when magic works, a lot of technology falls apart. The technology is not necessarily that great either. And like high-rise buildings often don't stand up in this world. So there is also a strong shapeshifter element to this. You'll notice all the books in this series, they have some kind of lion on the front because she does meet with this head of the shapeshifters, and there's a romance. I will say the first thing Kate ever says to him is, "Here, kitty, kitty, kitty." So these books do all have a particular sense of humor, but once again, in the beginning, she thinks he's kind of like alpha male asshole, not that interested in him, a little bit afraid of him, but they work together. It goes from there. I especially like with the Kate Daniels series because we got 10 books, and then we also have had like these novella spin-off series, and as well there is some other spin-off series where we get other characters and their romances. So it's become quite a big expansive world that covers quite a large amount of time. So by the later books, Kate is now significantly older, and this relationship is now like a very stable relationship that they've been in for a long time. And I really like kind of that maturity to the relationship. Like it's a different kind of romance than the typical like angsty getting together kind of romance. It's the like now we live with each other and we are sharing our lives with each other kind of romance. And I really like it. Anyway, those are all my favorite romance-y type books. Mostly fantasy with a side of romance, but that's the best I'm going to do. Do let me know if you've read any of those books, because I would love to chat with you about them down in the comments. Or let me know if based on these books you have any other like romancy, but not too much romance, any romancy recommendations for me. Let's chat down in the comments. Do subscribe if you'd like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.